My name is Joanna Lynn, and I am the president and founder of the Student Period Movement. I'm here with Ellie Anderson, our state engagement director, and Jen Lewis, the creator of Beauty and Blood, a project devoted to subverting the shame and stigma of menstrual blood. As part of our new series, Leaders in Menstrual Equity, we are interviewing Jen to learn more about Beauty and Blood and her experiences with the project.
So, we wanted to ask you to start off, how would you describe Beauty and Blood to someone who has no idea what it is?
I describe Beauty and Blood as being a macro photography project that focuses on women's health and social justice issues.
What inspired you to create Beauty and Blood?
It was actually three different things sort of happened at the same time, is how I think about the genesis of Beauty and Blood. So I had an instance when I was working in an infectious diseases research laboratory where I forgot to remove my last tampon for my menstrual cycle. And I went to my physician to make sure everything was okay and I hadn't contracted like any staph infection. And she suggested I use a menstrual cup. She was like, this might be a good time for you to sort of change products. And I started using the menstrual cup. But because I was new to using it, I didn't really trust that it lasted 10 to 12 hours like the box recommends. So when I was at work, I was emptying the cup out and noticing the patterns that the blood was making and sort of the movement that it was making in the water. And so I think it was the combination of switching to a menstrual cup, working in a research facility where there's a lot of anatomical art just up around the building, lots of medical posters, journals, cell biology, and then my art history background. And so I think having seen contemporary art and being exposed to the field of contemporary art gave me a different lens to look at the human body. So I think it was those three things that sort of came together to make Beauty and Blood.
And how or why have you become involved in menstrual advocacy?
As I've reflected more on it, what's interesting to me is I don't come from an activist background. I think what's inspiring about a lot of people who work in menstrual activism is that they have a long history of activism and advocacy. People come from this really strong background, and I come at it from a different lens. It was really through the creation of the art project that I walked into activism and advocacy for menstrual hygiene and menstrual health. And so it was really through the art that I started to realize the widespread impacts that the taboo and the stigma has on bodies that menstruate.
Can you walk us through your process of creating these images?
Sure. So there have been two different phases with creating Beauty and Blood. The very first phase that we started in 2013, we were working in real time where I would actually wear my menstrual cup for the 10 to 12 hours and I would let my partner know when it was time to empty the cup, and he would go and set our bathroom up with a tripod and construction lights, and then we would shoot in sort of real time as I was emptying the cup. And so in those images, we were shooting over the toilet bowl, so you had to actually look overhead. And so that's what those images are of. We quickly realized that we weren't capturing the dynamic images that we wanted. And so we switched to a different methodology that my husband and partner actually found for photographing liquids. And what this technique entailed is using a fish tank and using two different types of water. So one part of the water is actually salt water. So he goes and boils down big pellets of salt, and that creates a thicker density, so it slows the menstrual fluid down as it's moving through. And then there's a layer of just regular tap water, and that the menstrual fluid moves through quicker. So those are the two different techniques that we've used, and through the whole process I've deployed sort of an experimental mind frame, and so I'm always looking for different objects that I can use to actually collect the blood or drop the blood into the water. So I experiment a lot with pipettes and chopsticks. Broken glass has been something we've used in the past. Turkey basters. I really sort of favor a pipette or the chopsticks. The hole in a turkey baster is a little bit too wide and the blood just falls right through. So it's hard to sort of anticipate and work with and plan around. And then the chopsticks have been really interesting because the menstrual fluid actually attaches to the wood. And so it's easy to drag the blood through the water and sort of make different shapes and patterns. And to me, it feels a little bit like playing in the water.
And what were some of the initial reactions that you've received when you first presented your art?
I think the most common gut reaction is like, that's just so weird. Like, why would you do that? Like, where does this idea come from? But by and large, once I started talking to people about the idea behind it and how the human body's been used in art for decades, the conversation always shifted towards a more positive end. There have been people in like the comments section on websites in reaction to some of the articles that have been negative, but for the most part, my interactions with people have been positive.
And how do you respond to the negative responses regarding your art?
You know, I sort of take it with a grain of salt. Contemporary art, it's very difficult for people to attach to and understand. I think it's really difficult for people to understand sort of some of those abstract things that the visual image is trying to accomplish. And so the thing I like about art and contemporary art specifically is it lets people it meets people where they're at. And so it doesn't need to be aggressive or confrontational. They can interact with the image however they feel comfortable. In the gallery setting, it's not unusual to see people just sort of walk by and not really get it or attach to the art at all. But it's really interesting when somebody sort of pauses and realizes what what's actually going on here. And so that's sort of where I come at it from is I like that element that lets people sort of jump in and engage where they want.
So, I know that you originally used a menstrual cup as your primary blood delivery system, and we were wondering, do you have any new methods in doing so now, and how has your delivery system changed?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the only thing that's changed maybe has been storage. So we had an instance where the body of our camera broke and we weren't able to take photos in real time anymore. So I was still continuing to collect menstrual fluid through the cup, and then we were storing it in the refrigerator. So the collection system's the same. I've experimented a little bit with sea sponges, but I didn't really get too into that as a medium. It wasn't the most interesting. I really like the dynamic nature of all of the blood when it's collected. And so we've sort of experimented more with how much menstrual fluid we pour into the water at any given time.
Wanted to ask what was your vision behind this specific image?
So that one was really cool. So that's an image of cotton candy, and it's got this really great, like, bright blue behind it. And that was actually from a series that we took in a small vase. And I believe we used hand sanitizer or hand soap with it. And so it's actually the way the light is reflecting through the substance that's in there. And so the thing that I really enjoy about looking at the images when I'm going through and I'm working over the toilet or over the fish tank or the vase or whatever it is, I'm seeing the menstrual fluid and the rest of the solution, usually water, with the naked eye. And what Rob's actually capturing from behind the camera is with a macro lens. And so I have absolutely no idea what the camera is capturing until we go through and actually start reviewing the photos. And so the idea of, having a concept in mind when we actually approach a shoot, it's practically impossible because the blood itself is so unpredictable. And what we discovered is the temperature that the menstrual fluid's at, that actually plays a big part in how it moves in the water and fine tuning like the density of the salt. So it's really hard to approach the tank with like, this is the kind of image we're going for. And the cool thing about Cotton Candy and a bunch of the images that came out of that series was just that the background was so unexpected, and it was purely because of the light and how it was playing with the water and the hand soap. I think it was what it was in there.
That's definitely one of our favorite images.
Oh, that's awesome. I have that hanging in my office at work. It's one of our favorites too.
It's so cool.
It is, and it's just all that different color. And, there have been instances where people in the comment section on articles, they always say, like, oh, that's not what my menstrual blood looks like. There's no way this hasn't been doctored. Like, it has something else in it. And we really don't tone or color correct the photos very much. And so they're very much natural, raw images. Sometimes the values are pulled up and down, but for the most part, it's pretty much what we're pulling out of the tank. And there's never any additives beyond what's actually in the solution, which is always around slowing the blood down so we can get better imagery.
We were wondering, how has your work impacted its viewers?
Oh, that's a really great question. I've heard from a lot of different people and get a lot of anecdotal stories about how the artwork changes the way they see their own menstrual cycle or their own periods. I've heard that from several female menstruators. I've heard from some people who found that it improved their relationship with their male partners or spouses, and how their male partner and spouse relates to their daughter who's of menstruating age, or just around like that first moon time. So those have been really neat. I have one story of a woman who was talking to her daughters, and her daughter was like, "Oh my God, that's so gross. That's just, I don't even want to talk about it. Like, it's such a disgusting idea." And the mom was like, "Oh no, let's like stop and have a conversation about this. Why is it, you want to go and do all this lab work in biology in the research facility, but all of a sudden when it's your own body, you're totally grossed out by it." So that I thought was a really interesting story. And then there was one artist who is gender nonconforming and gender non-binary, who creates art, and not just menstrual art, but they did go through a period where they were working on artwork that had menstrual imagery. Some of it used menstrual fluid. And the thing that was really interesting and rewarding about that experience was that I was able to create a plenary session at a professional conference where that person was able to speak about their own experience, not only making art, but also how they lived through some real mental health challenges with their menstrual cycle, and the fact that they were non binary and couldn't get the right medical support or social support to sort of address why they were having this personal turmoil around their cycle. And they said, the artwork and just sort of seeing menstruation as, a valid subject matter, how it was helpful to them. Um, and then there was one other person that I heard from through social media that was really cool. They live overseas, I think it was in the UK, but they were an intersex person who have all external male genitalia, but have internal female reproductive organs. And they were talking to me about their struggle as a teenager and what they needed to decide when they started menstruating, because it was unknown until they started getting sick. And this person was going to go forward with having the transition surgery and ended up deciding they didn't want to go that route. And so now they menstruate, but they have full male genitalia outside. And so they sort of just wanted to engage and have a conversation about, have you ever thought about what it's like to try and use a menstrual cup when you have to get around like a penis and testicles? Or, have you thought about what it's like when two partners are menstruating and trying to have sex at the same time? And it was a really interesting dialogue. And, I think one of the things that's been the most eye opening and interesting to me through this art project is just hearing so many different experiences. I had a really small nugget of an idea when I started, and just the more this art project rolls forward, the more people I meet, and it's really interesting to learn about everybody's lives and just how different things are. And it's been a real mind opening experience, and I hope it does that for other people too.
That's amazing. If you had to categorize your work, what would it be?
Um, like a style.
Yeah, like a style.
I always think of it as being bio art and feminist art. I like to situate it with bio art, just thinking about like the human body and different body parts as art. The University of Michigan, where I work, we have a bio artography program, and I think they take some really great imagery during the scientific process. So most of those images come out of research labs, and they use these really brilliant dyes, and they look at pathogens and tumors and body parts in just a totally different lens. So I think my work is doing that also. While I don't necessarily have access to the same resources and tools that they do in the research labs, I do think of it as bioart because it deals with a biological substance. And there's just no way to separate it, I don't think, from feminism and the feminist art movement. And so I see a lot of linear history between what I'm doing now and what Judy Chicago was doing in the 1960s.
So, how has your project changed the way that you and your partner talk about periods? And can you speak about the before and after?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot early on. It came up at a feminist art conference, and the thing that we've noticed is that it causes us to be in communication about it more. And that was really the case when we were shooting in real time and we first started. And it was, really important to be like, well, what day is it? How much do you think you collected? Do you think you want to do a shoot tonight? Do we have time? Is it in the schedule? Are you feeling well? And there would be certain like behaviors or characteristics that I would exhibit, and he would just be like, "Are we getting close? Is this PMS that we're seeing?" And so it really expanded the conversation that he and I were having in general about my cycle. I don't have a very painful period or a very heavy period, so we didn't really have much cause to talk about it before we started the art project. Um, so we use a different for family planning method too, and so we're not usually in contact about like, this is what my temperature is, this is what my mucus looks like. So the art project really was the whole conversation. It sort of came out of nowhere. It's just sort of a, hey, I've got this crazy idea for a project, and then it was, so tell me about your cycle. Are you bleeding? How heavy is it? What are we doing? So
And this is our last question. If you
okay.
had to give advice to anyone who is interested in advocating for a specific cause, what would you say?
Oh, I think get in there anywhere you can at like the most basic and comfortable level. I'm not a real outspoken, bold kind of person, which I think is hard for people to reconcile with the art project. I didn't do public speaking before the art project. I've always sort of been a pretty shy person. And so it's important to me that we don't force activism onto people in uncomfortable ways. There are these really cute pins that say, like I have my period now or something that announces it, and it's like that's super cool for somebody who's bold enough to do that. If you're not, don't. Like maybe just pack little menstrual kits to drop off at your student the pantry, like this cupboards or whatever, for people who are experiencing financial difficulty or period poverty. Just finding any way to get involved in any side of it. The one thing I've discovered through the art project is that there are so many areas where we have menstrual inequity, and there's no shortage of places to get involved to your best comfort level and to use your best gifts. And so if it's organizing people and getting them to put an assembly line together, through a school group, do it. If you really like to work with the prison population, there are really great avenues for that also. So it's just sort of get involved where you feel comfortable.
Well, thank you so much. Do you guys have anything else to add?
Support your local artist. I'm a big proponent of that. The arts have a really big value outside of just being pretty things to look at. They challenge us, they make us think about the world in different ways. They work really nicely with the sciences and with health. And I think with just presenting visual data and, expanding our minds and understanding the value around arts. So that's sort of my big thing is support your local artist and, make a little effort to understand contemporary art. It's really important.
Hey guys, Joanna here with Percy. Thank you guys for tuning in to our first episode of Leaders in Menstrual Equity. Just a reminder to like and subscribe for more, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.